Not many languages can boast about being spoken during the time of the pyramids, but this language for sure can. Not only was it spoken at that time, but it was also written with the same script that is used today. But wait, it's actually not one but many languages. And what is the right way to call them? Azul. My name is Julie and welcome to the Tamazight or Berber languages. The name Berber comes from the Greek barbaros and basically means barbarian. This is what the Greek used to call anyone who's not Greek and whose language they didn't understand, and it just sounded to them like Berber. The name kinda stuck with the Berbers to this day, but as you might guess, this may not be the best way to call people. And this is definitely not how they refer to themselves. The Berbers call themselves Amazigh or Amazigh. That's the plural version of Amazigh. Yeah, that's how you form plural. The grammar section promises to be interesting. Amazigh means free people and their language is called Tamazight. But this name is also not without problems, as Tamazight can also refer to just one Berber variety spoken in the Central Atlas region of Morocco. So when you say Tamazight, do you refer to all Berber languages or just to that one language? That's why the term Berber still can be useful. Probably that's why it's still used. Talking to other people and finding the right words is a key skill these days, don't you think? As is talking to yourself and understanding yourself. It's been a while since I wanted to start therapy, and I'm happy that BetterHelp is the paid partner for this video, so I could finally try it out. BetterHelp is a platform that makes starting therapy straightforward. When you sign up, you fill out a questionnaire that helps match you with a licensed therapist who specializes in the areas you want to work on and corresponds to your specific needs. For example, I wanted a therapist who speaks my mother tongue. BetterHelp is committed to finding the right fit. If you don't click with your first therapist, you can easily switch to someone else until you find the perfect match. Their therapists are all carefully vetted professionals, and there's always a support team ready to help if you have questions. There's also a journal for personal reflection and even daily group sessions on different topics you can join. You know, therapy isn't just for crisis moments. It's a tool for personal growth that can help you develop better habits, manage stress, and improve your relationships. Personally, I started therapy because life can be too much sometimes, with trying to find a balance between my job, my YouTube channel, and building a life in a new country. If you're interested in giving therapy a try, BetterHelp is offering my viewers 10% off their first month. Just click the link in the description to get started. As you could guess from the name, there is not just one, but many Amazigh/Berber languages. They are spoken across almost the whole of North Africa, from Egypt's Siwa oasis in the east, all the way to Mauritania in the west. The main Berber-speaking countries are Morocco and Algeria. There are also Berber speakers in Egypt, Libya, Tunisia, Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mauritania. Finally, there has been a large migration of Berbers to Western Europe, especially to France, where there are around 2 million Berber speakers, and Paris may well be the most Berber city in the world. In total, there are somewhat around 14 million native speakers of Berber languages. Also, the Guanche language that used to be spoken in the Canary Islands before the Spanish, and which died out in the 17th century, probably was a distant cousin of Berber. Apart from these peripheral varieties and the Tuareg, which are all distinct enough to be called separate languages, it is difficult to draw a line between different Berber varieties. When it comes to official status, it's a bit of a mixed bag. In Niger and Mali, the Tuareg variety of Berber has been recognized as a national language since they gained independence in the 1960s. But in Morocco and Algeria, things have been more complicated. Since the independence, both countries embraced Arabo-Islamic identity, which aimed at reducing the colonial French influence, but also was viewing Berber languages unfavorably as it was perceived as a threat to national unity. Only in the 2000s, after years of protests and riots, Tamazight was recognized as an official language in both of these countries. Standard Moroccan Tamazight is based on merging its three main varieties, though it is mostly based on Teshahit, the biggest one, and standard Algerian Tamazight is mostly based on Kabyle. But still, there is limited education available in Tamazight, and apart from local rural areas, Arabic is dominating life on all levels in these countries. Even though there are still millions of Tamazight speakers, with growing urbanization and globalization, the future of Tamazight becomes more and more uncertain. But to understand the future, let's first turn to the past. Berber belongs to the Afroasiatic language family, along with the Semitic, Cushitic, Omotic, Ancient Egyptian, and Chadic languages. In fact, people started noticing similarities between Berber and Semitic since the early Middle Ages. Berbers have been part of the world of ancient civilizations since its beginnings. We find first mentions of Amazigh in ancient Egyptian records around 3,500 years ago. Libyans, as they were called back then, have been the immediate neighbors of the Egyptians, so they interacted with each other on a regular basis, sometimes in a friendly way, sometimes in a not-so-friendly way. Libyans frequently appear in Egyptian texts and paintings. They even conquered Egypt and ruled it during the 22nd, 23rd, and 24th dynasties, as between 10th and 8th centuries BC, if someone suddenly forgot the timeline of Egyptian dynasties. Throughout history, Berbers interacted with ancient Greeks who traded along the Mediterranean, with Phoenicians who traded along the Mediterranean and established a colony in Carthage, and with Romans who didn't bother trading but simply conquered everyone. Though all of the conquerors simply got the coastline, the desert would always belong to the Amazigh. Of course, the Arab conquest in the 7th century CE would transform the Amazigh realm the most. After becoming part of the Caliphate, the Berbers got integrated into the Islamic world and from then started the slow process of Arabization. I intentionally said slow, as North Africa didn't become Arab in one day. The next century saw a succession of Berber kingdoms, and the domination of Amazigh culture in the area continued until the 15th-16th century. With the Ottoman conquest, the Amazighen were pushed out of positions of power, and the Arabic language gradually took over. People switched to speaking Arabic in their daily life while remaining Amazigh by blood. That's why, even though the modern population of Maghreb mostly speaks Arabic, genetically they are still Amazigh. In the 19th century, Maghreb became a French colony and many French words entered the Amazigh languages. In the 1960s, after the North African nations declared independence, they embraced the Arab identity. Arabic has become a necessity for anyone who wants to interact with the modern world, so now it is harder and harder to find Tamazight monolinguals. And of course, Arabic loanwords in Tamazight are abundant. Some researchers estimate that over 50% of vocabulary in some Amazigh languages is of Arabic descent. The fortress that has preserved the Amazigh language and culture has been the Amazigh women. While the men in the Amazigh society have been the ones venturing out of home, traveling far, getting education, dealing with foreigners, and thus learning other languages, Amazigh women have been given the role of preserving traditions and social links. Some Amazigh societies even feature secret languages of women, like the Tagnaut and Tagjmit used by Shilha women. Tizrarin, narrated by women, are a cappella couplets that serve multiple purposes. They remind the community members of their social and moral norms in order to bridge differences between different community members and mediate conflicts, especially on big events like weddings, when a bunch of relatives who don't really like each other have to sit side by side. Women are at the heart of the vibrant and unique Amazigh culture, and they are the ones that have ensured that the Tamazight is passed on. Thanks to them, the language is still thriving, and we can explore how it is pronounced. Berbers have had their own writing system since the ancient times. The oldest known inscriptions date back to the 6th century BC. The writing system was likely an adaptation of the Phoenician alphabet, like any other alphabet out there, but they didn't just adopt the writing system. Instead, they took the concept of inscribing sounds. They probably saw some Phoenician inscriptions and decided they needed something like that too, without really knowing how to read those inscriptions. That's why some Berber letters look really similar to other alphabets derived from Phoenician, but the corresponding sound is completely different. That reminds me of something that happened in Cherokee, and yes, that's an invitation to check out my video about the Cherokee language. It has a very interesting history too. The ancient script was extensively used throughout all of North Africa, and thousands of inscriptions have been found, but it seems that by the turn of the millennia it progressively fell out of use. Centuries went on and Tamazight remained an oral language, with one small exception. Amidst the Saharan sands, the Tuaregs were still keeping the script alive. They called their writing system Tifenach, and they weren't using it to transmit information, but mostly for games, decoration, and short graffiti, and it was used mostly by women. In the 1970s, while the struggle for Berber languages in Morocco and Algeria was full on, a group of passionate Berber activists from the Berber Academy in Paris decided to breathe new life into this ancient script by taking the Tifenach of the Tuaregs and slightly modifying it, creating the so-called Neo-Tifenach. In 2003, the script, with some additions, was adopted by the Royal Institute of Amazigh Culture in Morocco. This version of the Tifenach is now the official writing system of the standard Moroccan Tamazight. However, its usage has been quite anecdotal and limited to mainly road signs and an occasional book that no one reads. For standard Algerian Tamazight, they use the Latin script. The promotion of Neo-Tifenach has received the criticism of being impractical. Some even consider the choice of Tifenach as a deliberate plot to make Tamazight look like an obsolete language and speed up its replacement by Arabic. On the other hand, this script creates a historical continuity between the people who used to write in the script 2000 years ago and the modern-day Amazigh. It showcases how old the language and its history is, and thus strengthens the Amazigh identity. Both views have a point, and personally, I think Tifenach looks so stylish and cool with its clean-cut lines. However, in practice, Tamazight is mostly written in Latin or Arabic script. Only the Tuaregs in the desert still keep using it, eternal as the sands surrounding them. Now let's explore the sounds. Tamazight has only 3 vowels, a, I, u, which is quite characteristic of Afroasiatic languages. There's also the 4th vowel, schwa, the most neutral ever sound, which kinda exists, but it kinda doesn't. It could be heard in consonant clusters where it is inserted. Sometimes it's indicated in writing, sometimes it's not. It's complicated. When it's not written, you can sometimes see words with only consonants in them, and it might look intimidating, but in reality, there is this little schwa sound in between the letters. What Tamazight lacks in vowels, it compensates with the consonants. There are a lot of them. The most interesting are probably the emphatic consonants, giving the language a very specific sound. Hear the difference between s and sa. In the second example, the tongue is positioned differently, leaving some air between it and the top of the mouth. There are many other interesting consonant sounds, but I don't want to attempt pronouncing them and fail miserably. Let's better leave this task to someone much more qualified, the native speakers.
مالك يزري زنزال
يزرين كلين كنغيد مع العشرة يتهزع وكال يلا هكا 3 دقائق ولا تكملها صافي يزري اللي كل يسبق المسائل
يتصدق على يا سولتو في حدث تحكم الغضيق سنت اساس الجرح يبقى زير النوم يتصدق تقضى عليا سولتو في حد استحكم الغيظ يقزم تاساس الجرح يبقى زير النور
الشغبي نقول نجودي نهاي غاس ينغزفن يسردو ساسدوسن إم دبدي دنغاس يا أرتا ترنغاس ينغين نغني تامت طاغر مارفات إذا قطن غلط ضدي مقور
غلط غاس تكلاتي
البين جم السينغ وجم السينغ وجم السينغ مسينة قصة تترس مسلسلين تو ضدي كنت وايغ موريتان هسل مسينة بيدو تاغر أدفوري لو سيتي نقيم هذا كان لنا تموت نقيم دس ندار نقي.
How does Tamazight sound to you? Do you hear the difference between varieties of Tamazight? Now let's explore this variety in grammar. Grammar is probably where all of the Amazigh languages reunite. The words they use may be slightly different, the pronunciations can have some variation, but the underlying grammar stays the same. In Tamazight, there are two numbers, singular and plural, and two genders, masculine and feminine. Both number and gender are formed in a peculiar way. For example, to make a noun plural, you either add a suffix and modify the first vowel, like this, aham, house, becomes icham, houses, or you can modify the vowels inside the word, barbaros, monkey, becomes iburas, monkeys, or do both. Easy, fly, becomes izan, flies. Now the gender. Masculine nouns will usually start with a vowel, but with feminine it gets more interesting. The trademark of the feminine is the letter T. To form a feminine from a masculine word, you surround it with T. That is, you put a letter T in the beginning and in the end, like in Agmar, male horse, which becomes Tagmart, female horse. The feminine noun doesn't have to be formed from a masculine, but if it is a feminine, it will almost always have the initial and final T, like Armaz, men, and Tamtut, woman. This double T construction is also used to make a noun a smaller version of itself, a diminutive in other words, because anything in feminine becomes smaller and cuter, or at least in Tamazight it does. Afus, hand, versus tafust, little hand. The same construction is also used to differentiate collective versus one, like the collective concept of carrot, hizu, versus one particular carrot, tahizut. Not sure what masculinity and femininity has to do with that. Tamazight nouns also have two cases, but they are not really called cases, but rather two states, free and annexed states. The noun is in the free state when it's a direct object, and it's in its basic form. The noun is in the annexed state when it's the subject of a phrase, and then it gets its first vowel modified. For masculine nouns, for example, armas becomes urmas, or its final vowel dropped. For feminine nouns, tazduit, be, becomes tzduit. So it's like nominative and accusative cases, except that the accusative is the basic one and the nominative is the one that gets changed. Let's see an example sentence so it all gets a little bit less confusing, hopefully. Ifka, umgar, idrimen, I umdakwalis. The old man gave money to his companion. First things first, Tamazight languages are VSO, verb, subject, object, which is encountered in only 9% of languages, but encountered in some Afroasiatic languages, especially one you may have heard about. It's called Arabic. So in this particular phrase, the verb gave goes first. Actually, this verb already contains in itself all the information about the subject, so it's better translated as he gave. The word umgar, the old man, in the annexed state functions not exactly as a subject, but as a kind of expansion or explanation of the subject. Also, you can change the word order and put any word in the beginning that would put more emphasis on that word. But well, if you did put the old man in the beginning, that wouldn't make it a pure SOV word order. It would be more like the emphasized topic plus the VSO phrase, translated roughly as for the old man, he gave money to his companion. And Amghar is not anymore in its annex state because it doesn't go after the verb anymore, so now it's free. The other big topic is the verb, and you know it's big and important because it goes first in the sentence. The verbs are conjugated not by tense but by three moods: imperfective or habitual or unaccomplished, aorist or undefined, kinda like present and future, and perfective or accomplished, kinda like past. The verbs agree with the person, number, and gender of the subject by attaching corresponding affixes. For each of the three moods, a different stem form is used, so the same verb in different moods can become quite unrecognizable. In the case of the perfective, the negation also gets its own stem form. Phew, these were just some basic concepts, but already super complex, so I can't imagine what is there when you go deeper into the language. I mean, this whole situation with being the most native language on its own territory, but at the same time being in a slightly vulnerable state is... I mean, it's not new, it happens with many languages these days, but it's not the easiest. And then you have this dilemma. Do you claim the historic heritage, bring back the ancient rhetoric system and try to spread it with the risk of it not being adopted and just being ignored? Or do you try to modernize with the aim to facilitate communication in the language, but then you lose that heritage aspect that brings pride? Are you team Tifinagh or not? I'm really curious to hear your opinion, especially if you are a native speaker. Thank you to my top tier patrons for picking Tamazight, and you can pick the next language right here. Thank you so much for watching, and see you in our next exploration.